This is Just Listen, hosted by George Goodman. Today is August 24th, 2026. I'm recording this now because my youngest daughter is getting married and I will actually be in Denmark Monday flying back when this podcast would have been broadcast. So I'm going to release this one early. So, let's talk about U.S. federal government policy on the midterm elections for 2026. Why is this important to you? Well, for the next 2 years, depending on how people vote, this is just so important. And just as a reminder, the midterm elections are November 3rd, 2026. And so, with the government federal policy, involves discussions around executive actions, regulating voting methods, federal spending negotiations, and Department of Justice oversight regarding election security. Policy discussions are influenced by various governmental bodies and partisan considerations. There's nothing new there. That's how we've done it in the past. So, there is a disagreement between the executive branch and the legislative branch for the upcoming midterm elections. And you know everything out there. They're talking about mail in voting discussions, they're talking about judicial review. Judicial review involves federal courts have been involved in reviewing the executive actions. And as a result, then those are going to the Supreme Court. And most recently, there have been two or three about voting. And then the proof of citizenship. Now, both sides of Congress have made this an issue with people running for the House of Representatives and for the Senate. Now, it begs a question. Do you see or did you hear anything about affordability? Did you hear anything about prescription drugs, etc.? So you as the voter need to be aware of that because when I did the research on this is what came up that the government policy on the midterm elections, and this is what they're currently worried about. Now, the other part of the discussion for the midterm elections is government funding, funding priorities, polling place regulations, and it matches what they were talking about earlier with the mail-in voting and all that stuff. Now, keep in mind something, and this is without taking a side. Congress has the power to change all of these things. When they come to Washington for the House of Representatives and for the Senate, they have the power to make the changes. And so, actually, the changes can't be made for them because no one is talking about affordability so far. All right. So, federal law enforcement oversight. So, the Department of Justice and the FBI conduct investigations regarding voter registration and ballot processing. The states are actually in charge of that. I did a podcast where they laid out that normally states handle that. Now, just a word about something. There's two or three states that potentially you could have some federal government oversight for the midterms. I'm just warning you that could be coming down. Haven't read that yet, but that's something to think about under the guise of the U.S. federal government policy with the federal law enforcement oversight. So, discussions and perspectives. Federal law enforcement actions related to elections have been the subject of discussion among state and federal officials, meaning the people in Congress. And it's not the whole country. It's probably about 10 states that the federal government is worried about for the policy based on mail-in voting and proof of citizenship, which is why the other side is trying to enact the new voting law across the country. All right. So, now finally, we get to combating consumer affordability. Crickets, crickets, crickets. It's just mentioned briefly. And the bigger discussion is what I just said earlier. So, the federal government policy and legislative actions. Save American Act, that's what would safeguard American voter eligibility. The second one is avoiding government shutdowns. In August 2026, the Senate passed a bipartisan continuing resolution to keep the federal government funded, specifically aiming to maintain economic stability. Imagine that. And imagine who voted for it and who didn't. You can look it up because with government shutdowns, I've seen that they are actually coming more so the last 10 years because the minority party is trying to bring attention to what they want to pass. That's what they're about, and they don't care who gets affected in the federal government. So with the last one, the airports and the security there were affected until the president actually had to step in and he started paying security at the airports, and everybody remembers that. And so the Senate is trying to make sure that that doesn't happen again. The House of Representatives is pretty tight numbers wise right now, so that's possibly why they haven't gotten involved yet. Targeted consumer interventions. So federal agencies are implementing specific policy measures related to consumer expenses. This includes prescription drugs, housing, credit card interest rates. Now, you should be interested in that because Congress could actually do a lot more because they, according to the Constitution, they can regulate commerce. And they have the language, but then the federal poverty level guide comes in there. That's why it's hard for a lot of people to even qualify for that in the first place. All right. So the top issues shaping the midterms, according to the federal government: affordability and the economy, which I said that they weren't really talking about because based on my research, their affordability and the economy, they want to tax the rich. That's what I keep hearing. And also, states are doing things depending on what state you're in. So economic pressures are a significant concern for U.S. adults. Costs for goods and services, along with housing, are key issues in the campaigns. So they're campaigning for it, but if you look at Congress's record for this last year, it's just talk. And there's talk about what I just said of housing, prescription drug costs, and credit card interest rates, which, by the way, even if they implement it, they have it expire. Caregiver crisis. Rising costs related to medical care, child care, elder care are a prominent theme. These expenses have been noted as impacting the workforce. Now, keep in mind, these are what the people want, not what Congress is talking about for the midterms. I told you what they were talking about. They're talking about addressing the government funding. One of those is because they are trying to get funding for the conflict in Iran, and the other side disagrees with that. And then the polling place regulations. So you don't hear anything about affordability, just in conversations. No legislation to um, change the laws so that people can afford and the economy could be changed. And caregiver crisis, medical care, child care, elder care. I just said that. Congress isn't really talking about introducing bills. Nobody's done that. The only thing that they have introduced is taxing millionaires and billionaires from my last podcast, which they don't get any specifics and nothing leaves the chamber. Geopolitical conflict and tariffs. The ongoing military conflict in Iran has influenced domestic policy discussions. The conflict has been associated with oil price volatility and inflation concerns, which can impact the political climate. Okay, from the perspective of who are we going to keep funding it? And that's a fair discussion. If Congress, the people against it, need to clearly identify themselves as not wanting to fund the war for the midterms. Okay? Because if Congress changes hands, you know that the conflict is going to be front and center if the other side gets in there. Now, that's the third issue for ordinary people, voters. And then the last one is political integrity and gerrymandering. Concerns about systemic aspects of politics are being expressed by voters. Issues such as gerrymandering and campaign finance are noted anxieties. Okay, so the last one, that's pretty cosmic. And no one's really talking about that. The people are, but like I said before, that's not what Congress is talking about. Just last week, they had Anthony Fauci there, and they were spending more time talking about that. So you, the voter, have to look at the U.S. federal government policy, which I'm telling you is executive actions and discussions on voting. So basically, that means that they're trying to stop the executive, the other side is, and that's what they're campaigning on for the midterms. So you, the voter, have to decide if that is what you want from Congress. Government funding, funding priorities, polling place regulations. And again, I don't see anything about affordability or making interest rates go down so that people can buy a house. Let me know what you think. This is Just Listen, hosted by George Goodman. Have a great day. And as always, policy matters. And as voters, we should be looking at candidates' policies versus emotions. Have a great day.